83 people were seated around candlelit tables in a rooftop venue in downtown Nashville when my husband pushed back his chair, picked up his glass of water, and stood up. He didn't tap the glass. He didn't smile at the crowd. He just stood there for a moment with the kind of stillness that makes a room go quiet on its own. And when it did, he said, "Before we get to the toasts, there's something I need to share with everyone here." My hands were in my lap. I hadn't moved them since the ceremony ended. I'd been sitting with them folded like I was waiting for a verdict, which I suppose I was. People were still unsettled from what had happened 2 hours earlier. The way my parents had stood up mid-ceremony when the officiant was barely through the second reading and walked out. Not quietly. My father had made sure of that. My husband looked across the room. His eyes found mine first, and what I saw in them wasn't anger. It was something steadier than that. The look of a man who has already done the math and knows exactly what he's about to say. "You watched Jenna's parents leave this afternoon," he said. "You deserve to know why." "My name is Jenna. I'm 32 years old. I'm a licensed occupational therapist at a pediatric rehab clinic in Nashville, which means I spend my days helping children relearn how to hold a pencil or button a shirt, and I'm very good at staying calm when things fall apart. It's a professional requirement. I'm also the older daughter in a family where being older meant being the one who handled things, paid her own tuition, managed her own car payments, called home every Sunday because if she didn't, nobody would reach out first. My younger brother Scott is 28. He lives 40 minutes from my parents, which used to make me a little jealous until I realized that proximity to them wasn't actually a gift. He's a personal trainer with a lifestyle that costs more than a personal trainer's salary should allow, but my parents have always found ways to make the numbers work for him. New tires for his truck. A deposit on his apartment. Just until he gets on his feet, my mother would say, and I would nod like I hadn't heard that exact sentence 6 times in 8 years. When my now husband Kevin proposed, we were standing on a trail in Percy Warner Park on a cold November morning, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. We set a date quickly. April 19th. Rooftop venue downtown. We booked it 8 months in advance, put down a non-refundable deposit, sent save the dates before Thanksgiving. When I told my parents, my mother actually teared up. She said it was a beautiful date. My father shook Kevin's hand and said, "Welcome to the family." For about 3 months, everything felt like it was going to be fine. Then February arrived. My mother called on a Wednesday morning while I was eating breakfast before a long shift. I could tell from her first word that she'd rehearsed the opening. "So," she said brightly, "you know Scott has been talking about doing something special for his 30th. Scott's 30th birthday was in April. I said yes, I knew that. "He found this incredible fishing trip," she said. "Alaska. Charter boat, the whole thing, a week out on the water. His friends are doing it and he really wants to go, Jenna. He's been so stressed and he deserves a break." I waited. "It's April 19th week," she said. I sat with that for a second. "That's my wedding," I said. "I know, honey." Her voice shifted, still warm but with something underneath it, the warmth of someone who has already decided the answer. "We were thinking maybe you could look at pushing the date, just by a few weeks. The venue might work with you." I set down my fork. "Mum, we signed a contract, we paid a deposit, people bought plane tickets." "It's just a few weeks," she said. "It's not just a few weeks, it's everything that goes with it. The florist, the photographer, Kevin's family flying in from Ohio." "Kevin's family would understand," she said, as if she had any idea what Kevin's family would or wouldn't do. "Mum, I'm not moving my wedding for Scott's fishing trip." A pause. Then, softer in that tone she used when she wanted me to feel unreasonable, "He already put money down on it." "Then he should have checked the calendar first," I said. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said she'd talk to my father, which in our family had always meant prepare for a harder conversation coming. My father called the next evening. He doesn't warm up. He doesn't ask how you're doing first. He states the situation, and then he states the conclusion, and the gap between those two things is where I spent most of my childhood trying to exist. "Your brother wants to do this trip," he said. It matters to him. My wedding matters to me, I said. You're being rigid. I'm being rigid, I repeated. I planned a wedding for 8 months and I'm rigid. You could be flexible, he said. This is how families work, compromise. I'd heard that word from him my entire life, always deployed in the same direction, toward me. I'm not changing the date, I said. He let out a breath, long and deliberate. Then he said, if you're going to be like this, don't expect us to make it a priority either. What does that mean? It means family goes both ways, he said. You want us to show up for you, you show up for Scott. I'm not asking anyone to miss the trip, I said. My voice was steady in the way it gets when I'm working very hard to keep it that way. I'm saying my wedding is on April 19th and I hope everyone can be there. Hope, my father said like the word tasted off. We'll see. And then he was done with the conversation, the way he always was when he'd said what he came to say. I didn't tell Kevin right away. I sat with it for 2 days, turning it over, looking for the angle where it made sense. Then I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about him. He worked in supply chain logistics before switching to operations management, and he has this quality of absorbing information completely before responding, like he's building a full picture before he draws any conclusions. When I finished, he said, Scott put money down on a fishing trip the same week as our wedding. Yes. Did he know the date? He had to save the date. Kevin nodded slowly. Okay, he said. And your parents want you to move the wedding. They're suggesting it. Jenna, he said my name quietly. That doesn't add up. I know it doesn't add up. No, I mean, he paused. Scott doesn't have the kind of money to put a deposit down on an Alaskan charter fishing trip. Those run thousands of dollars. I stared at him. I know what those trips cost, he said. I've priced them. I've always wanted to do one. A beat. Where did he get the money? And that was the question I hadn't let myself ask, because in my family, asking that question had always felt like an accusation. Kevin asked it like it was just math. He started quietly. He didn't announce that he was investigating anything. He just started paying attention in a way I hadn't been trained to do. He asked to see the paperwork from when my grandfather passed 4 years ago. My grandfather on my mother's side, Grandpa Howard, had died and left behind what my mother had described as a small fund that he'd set up for me for a big moment in life, like a wedding or buying a house. I'd signed something. I remembered pen and paper at a kitchen table during a holiday weekend. My mother had called it just some estate formalities, and I hadn't looked closely because she was crying and I was trying to hold the day together for everyone else. I had almost no paperwork. Kevin found what he could through legitimate channels. A financial advisor contact helped him understand the structure of the account, public records, a legal directory. He asked careful questions in that tone of his that sounds like polite curiosity and lands like a scalpel. One evening in March, about 6 weeks before the wedding, he came and sat beside me on the couch and opened his laptop. I need to show you something, he said. He turned the screen toward me. It was a transfer record. The account number matched the one on the single document I'd found from my grandfather's estate. The transfer was dated 11 months earlier. Amount, $54,000. Recipient, an account in my brother's name. Memo, family support. I read it 3 times. The number sat in my chest like a stone dropped in still water, spreading outward in rings. That's, I started. Your grandfather's fund, Kevin said. Yes. They transferred it to Scott. 11 months ago, he let me sit with the timing, right around when he would have been planning this trip. My throat felt tight. I thought about my grandfather. He'd been a quiet man, a retired postal worker from Murfreesboro who grew tomatoes in his backyard and kept his promises in writing. He'd told me once, when I was maybe 16, that he was putting something aside for me. He'd said, don't let them talk you into spending it on something small. I'd thought that was just something grandparents said. There's more, Kevin said gently. He'd found a message thread, not through hacking or anything dramatic, through my mother actually. She'd accidentally copied him on an email chain months ago when she was trying to forward him rehearsal dinner details, and the thread she'd pulled up was the wrong one. He'd closed it immediately, but not before seeing enough to know it existed. He'd screenshotted only what was necessary and consulted with a friend in legal to understand what he was looking at. He showed me the message from my brother to my parents, sent the previous spring. "Can you just use Jenna's fund for it? She probably won't need it for a while and I'll pay it back. She has Kevin now, she's fine." I read it twice. She has Kevin now, she's fine. I set the laptop down on the coffee table and walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the dark street for a long moment. Kevin didn't try to fill the silence. He just waited. "He knew it was mine," I said finally. "Yes." "And he asked them to take it." "Yes." I turned around, and then they asked me to move my wedding. Kevin looked at me steadily. "So the date conflict," he said carefully, "wasn't really about the trip." I understood then what he meant. The timeline. If I'd moved my wedding, the trip would have happened, the money would have been spent, and there would have been nothing left to find. The whole push to reschedule. It was damage control in a direction I wasn't supposed to notice. I asked my brother to meet me, not at my parents' house. I picked a coffee shop near his gym because I wanted him on neutral ground, somewhere he couldn't lean on the familiar architecture of our childhood home to feel like he had the upper hand. He showed up in workout clothes, ordered a coffee, and sat down across from me with the easy posture of someone who had no idea what was coming. "What's up?" he said. "Did you take money from Grandpa Howard's fund?" I asked. No preamble, no easing in. He blinked. Then he laughed once, short and sharp, the kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh. "Wow, okay. It's a simple question." "It's a family account," he said. "It's not really yours specifically." "It was left for me by our grandfather," I said, "for my wedding or buying a house. I think that's pretty specific." He picked up his coffee. "Mom and Dad thought it made sense. I needed it more right now." "More than I needed for my wedding," I said. He shrugged. "You have Kevin. You guys are doing fine." There it was again, the logic of someone who had been told his whole life that his needs were the active variable and everyone else's were the constant. "You asked them to take it from my fund," I said. "I've seen the message." He went still, not dramatically, just a slight stillness, like an animal that's been startled but is trying not to show it. Then he recovered. "You're going through private messages now?" "It came to Kevin by accident, and I've talked to a lawyer," I said, "so I know what the options are." His jaw tightened. "A lawyer?" "Yes." "You're going to sue your own family over money." "I'm going to pursue what was legally left to me by our grandfather," I said. "Whether that becomes a lawsuit depends on what happens next." He leaned back. His expression shifted into something I recognized, the slow hardening of someone who's been told no for maybe the first time and doesn't have the emotional vocabulary for it. "You're really going to do this?" he said. "I'm not moving my wedding," I said, "and I want the money returned." He stared at me for a moment. Then he said, "Don't expect Mum and Dad to take your side on this." "They never have," I said. I picked up my bag. "Enjoy the coffee." I didn't cry until I got to my car, and even then it wasn't loud. It was the kind of crying that happens when something you've suspected your whole life finally gets confirmed on paper, and you realize the hurt isn't new, you've just been carrying it in the dark. Kevin had already talked to an attorney before I got home, a friend of a colleague who specialized in estate disputes. Not because Kevin was aggressive or litigious, he's genuinely the most measured person I know, but because he understood that paper has a short memory and we needed to document everything while the trail was clear. The weeks leading up to the wedding were quiet in a specific way. My parents didn't call to ask about centerpiece colors or whether the caterer needed a head count. My mother sent a single text that said, "I hope you know what you're doing," and I didn't respond. My father didn't contact me at all. A week before the wedding, my mother called. Her voice was the version she used when she wanted to sound like she was making a generous offer. "We've been thinking," she said, "and we're willing to come to the wedding if you agree to drop this whole money thing." I let her finish. "The attorney will handle the money thing," I said. "You're welcome to come to my wedding regardless." A long pause. "You're really not going to let this go?" "Grandpa Howard wanted me to have it," I said. "I'm letting him decide." "You're tearing this family apart," she said. Her voice shifted, thinner now, closer to the edge of something. "Over money." "Over something that was mine," I said. "That's different." She hung up. April 19th was a Saturday. 63 degrees, a little wind, the kind of spring afternoon that feels like an apology from winter. The rooftop venue had string lights strung between iron posts and tiny white flowers in mason jars on every table. Kevin's family had flown in from Columbus. My cottage friends were there, my co-workers, an aunt and two cousins from my mother's side who'd quietly texted me that they were coming regardless. My parents were in the front row when the ceremony started. I'd been told by the venue coordinator, and I'd accepted it without knowing what to do with it. The officiant had barely reached the second reading, a passage about what it means to choose someone, when I heard the chair. My father stood up. He didn't do it quietly. The chair scraped against the rooftop tile and people turned. My mother stood with him, her expression fixed, like she'd decided exactly what her face was going to do and locked it in place. My father looked at me across the gathered rows of people. He said loudly enough to carry, "When you're ready to be a daughter again, you know where to find us." And they walked out. 83 people watched them go. I don't remember deciding not to cry. I think my body just understood that it had done enough managing for other people. I turned back to the officiant. Kevin was looking at me with the same steadiness he always had, and I thought, this is the person I chose, not them. We finished the ceremony. We said our vows. We kissed, and someone near the back started clapping first, and then everyone did, and the Nashville skyline was behind us going gold in the late afternoon light. At the reception, people were kind in the cautious way of people who have witnessed something they don't know how to name. They congratulated us warmly and didn't mention my parents and drank their cocktails a little faster than they might have otherwise. I danced. I ate. I took photos with Kevin's mom, who kept squeezing my hand a second longer than necessary, which was her way of saying the thing she didn't want to say out loud. I thought maybe we could just let the evening carry us through. Maybe I could absorb it the way I'd absorbed everything else, take it in, find a place to put it, keep moving. Then Kevin stood up. He didn't clink his glass. He stood up with the quiet authority of someone who has decided that a thing needs to be said and has chosen the right moment to say it. The room noticed, the way rooms do when someone changes the energy without making noise. He said, "Before all the toasts, I want to share something with everyone here." The conversation stinned. Someone's fork stopped midway. "You saw Jenna's parents leave the ceremony this afternoon," he said, "and I think you deserve to understand why." He nodded to the best man, who was managing a laptop near the edge of the roof. The slideshow of our engagement photos disappeared, replaced by a document blown up large enough to read from the back tables. A transfer record. $54,000, my grandfather's account number, my brother's name. People leaned forward in their chairs. Kevin kept his voice level. He didn't perform outrage. He just stated facts the way he always did, like someone reading figures from a spreadsheet that happened to be devastating. Jenna's grandfather set aside money for her, specifically for a major life milestone, like this wedding. He paused. That money was transferred to her brother's account 11 months ago. Another pause. To fund a fishing trip. In Alaska. On the week of our wedding. A murmur moved through the room like a current. He nodded to the best man again. The document changed to a screenshot of the message. My brother's words, clean and plain in black sans serif font. "Can you just use Jenna's fund for it? She probably won't need it for a while and I'll pay it back. She has Kevin now. She's fine." Someone near the front made a sound, not quite a gasp, something smaller. The kind of involuntary response you can't stop when you see something that resets your understanding of a situation. Kevin looked across the room. When Jenna refused to move the wedding date to accommodate the trip, The trip that was paid for with her own money. Her parents told her that walking out of her ceremony today would teach her a lesson. He let that sit for a moment. What it actually taught her, he said, is something she probably already knew, that she was never going to change the way things worked in her family by playing by their rules. He picked up his water glass and looked at me. "Jenna," he said, and the room was so quiet that everyone heard it, "you will never have to carry this alone again." I didn't try to stop the tears this time. I let them come quick and hot and wiped them fast and laughed at myself a little, because of course this was when they arrived. Not when my father scraped his chair across the tile, not when my mother's face closed like a door, but now, in the middle of 83 people finally seeing the shape of something I'd spent years pretending didn't have a shape. The toasts continued. The band started back up, the Nashville skyline went from gold to purple, and the lights of the city came on below us. That night, Kevin sent the demand letter. The attorney had drafted it 2 weeks earlier and it was sitting ready, the way you load a flare before you need it. He sent it at 11:14 p.m. from our hotel room while I was taking off my wedding shoes and our champagne was going flat on the nightstand. My parents called the next morning. My mother's voicemail was long and tearful. How could we do this to the family? Didn't we understand what we were risking? Was money really worth more than people? My father's message was shorter and colder. We'd regret this. We didn't understand what we were throwing away. My brother texted me 4 words, "Are you serious right now?" I typed back, "Yes." The process wasn't quick or graceful. There were weeks of back and forth through attorneys, threats that never materialized into anything, phone calls I didn't answer. My mother tried going through Kevin's mother once, which did not go the way she'd hoped. My brother alternated between insisting the money was a loan he'd always planned to repay and insisting I was misinterpreting the entire situation, sometimes in the same message. The fund was restructured under legal supervision. The restitution agreement took about 3 months to finalize. My brother repaid a portion directly and my parents covered the remainder. Not willingly, not gracefully, but in writing, with signatures, the way things need to be when you've learned that verbal agreements in your family have a very specific weight. I didn't call to smooth it over after. I didn't reach out to check if anyone's feelings had healed. I'd spent 32 years as the person who kept the temperature regulated in a house where I was the only one holding the thermostat, and I put it down. About 2 months after the wedding, I ran into one of my cousins, my mother's niece, at a farmer's market near my neighborhood. She hesitated when she saw me, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to stop. Then she did stop. She said, "I was at your wedding." I said I knew. She looked at me for a moment. "I didn't realize," she said slowly, "about your grandfather's money, about any of it. I knew things were uneven with you and Scott. I knew that, but I didn't know it was like that." I looked at the jar of honey I was holding. "Neither did I said. "Not until I saw it written down." She nodded and touched my arm and then kept walking. I stood there for a second in the morning sun, between a bread table and a flower stand, and thought about my grandfather, his backyard tomatoes, his handwriting on the envelope, the way he'd pulled me aside when I was a teenager and said, "You have a good head. Don't let them talk you out of using it." I used to it. Kevin and I still have the photos from the rooftop. In one of them, you can see the 2 empty chairs in the front row, slightly apart from the others, the way absence has a shape if you know where to look. People sometimes ask me if my wedding was ruined by what happened. I tell them the truth. My parents walked out of my ceremony to prove a point about who held the power. What they proved instead was something they hadn't intended to demonstrate at all, that the story I'd been told about my family my whole life was a version edited for my compliance, not my understanding. And when my husband stood up in front of 83 people with a laptop and a water glass and said the thing that needed saying, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like someone had finally opened a window in a room I'd forgotten was sealed. My grandfather kept his tomatoes in rows. That's what I kept thinking about afterward. Not the legal documents, not the bank transfer number, not my father's voice cutting across the ceremony. Just those tomato plants in his backyard in Murfreesboro, staked and tied and tended the way he tended everything he cared about, quietly, consistently, without needing anyone to notice. He told me once that the money he was setting aside wasn't really about money. It was about making sure I had something solid under me when I needed it most. I didn't understand what he meant when I was 16. I think I was too busy trying to be agreeable to hear it clearly. What happened with my family didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a pattern I'd been part of my whole life, one where my needs were the flexible variable and Scott's were the fixed point, where asking questions was reframed as disloyalty, where the word family was used the way some people use a law. I'd accepted that pattern for so long that I'd stopped seeing it as a choice. I thought it was just how things were. The thing about actions is that they compound. My parents made a decision to move money that wasn't theirs to move. My brother made a decision to ask them to do it, knowing exactly whose fund it was. Those weren't accidents. They were choices made by people who had calculated, correctly for a long time, that I would absorb the cost without examining the bill. The consequences they faced weren't punishment. They were just the math finally catching up. Kevin saw it before I did. That's what I'm most grateful for. Not that he stood up at the reception, not the demand letter, not the attorney. It's that he looked at the situation without the fog of my childhood obscuring his view, and he said quietly, "This doesn't add up." He was right. It never had. I used to think that keeping the peace was a form of goodness, that staying calm and not making things hard for people was the right way to move through a family that ran on a particular kind of hierarchy. I know now that there's a difference between being good and being convenient. I had been very convenient for a very long time. Real integrity, I've come to understand, isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being honest about what you see, even when seeing it clearly costs you something. It's about doing the right thing in the direction of the person who's actually been wronged, not in the direction of whoever is most likely to make your life difficult if you don't. And the strength it takes to hold that line, to not call, to not smooth it over, to not trade your own clarity for someone else's comfort, that doesn't come from anger. It came from getting very tired, and then very still, and then deciding that I was done carrying a story that had never been true. My grandfather said, "Don't let them talk you out of using your head." I finally listened. It only took me until I was 32, standing in a rooftop venue with the Nashville skyline behind me and 2 empty chairs in the front row, to understand what he meant. I think he would have been okay with the timeline,